who's originally from Portugal, but he's yet another individual that's been assimilated by San Francisco. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
So, can you hear me? Yeah, cool. So, today I want to talk about 7 values of effective tech writing teams. But before I do that, I have something to confess. I'm a skeptic. I really am. And every time I see something like the 7 habits of highly effective people or the 8 secrets of success, I wonder, really? Is that all it takes? And it's not that I don't trust the people who come up with these books. I do. You see, my problem is that success or effectiveness are kind of words without a meaning. Success or effectiveness only have a meaning if you have a specific goal in mind. And a goal can be something like, I want to have more money, or I want to have more time, or I want to be able to influence more people. And now, here's my problem. It's 10 p.m., and I'm working on a presentation called The 7 Values of Effective Tech Writing Teams. And I realize I can't explain any of these values if I don't explain what the goal of a tech writer is. And so I started to think about this. And I remember someone telling me that the goal of a tech writer is to teach people how to use a product. It kind of made sense to me. But I remember someone else telling me that the goal of a tech writer is to explain complex information in a clear way. And while these goals make sense to me, I don't think they're ambitious enough. I've seen great tech writers at work, and of course, they teach people how to use products, and of course, they explain complex information in a clear way, but there's something else. There's something more profound that guides them. So, after thinking about this, I started to understand that probably these 2 goals made sense a while ago, but probably not today. A while ago, we could get away with products that were hard to use. And when our users complain about our products, we could tell them, oh, go read the manual, or go do some training. And they would be okay with that. But that's not the world we live in today. Just imagine that you had to read the manual for every app that you have on your phone, right? And your tablet, and your laptop, or even your watch. So our users are people just like you and I. They have a bunch of tools and a bunch of apps to use, and they don't really care about reading documentation or doing training. They care about using tools that empower them to create amazing work. So I think that today, the goal of a tech writer is to help build products that need no documentation. And I know that this might seem counterintuitive. But if you know that your users don't really care about reading documentation or following tutorials or any of that, then you should be finding ways to help your users and making your apps easier to learn. And of course, when you fail at that, you can always create documentation. But creating documentation should not be your primary goal. No one wants to read that. So if your goal is to help create better apps, then I can share with you 7 values that can help you succeed at that. You should be the CEO of the docs. You should know the market, the product, and the users. You should be asking why and applying the 80-20 rule. You should be proactive and treating words as you treat any other tool, and you should coach others. Let's jump into the first one. So, as the CEO of Docs, if you want to become effective, you need to act like a CEO. And this essentially means that you need to define a vision. You should be providing hints to users so that they can do the tasks they want without having to read any kind of documentation. And I'm talking about creating good buttons, labels, tooltips, or any other kind of microcopy that can nudge users in the right direction so that they can keep going without having to read any kind of documentation. You should also define a way for a user to get some help when they are stuck. Ideally, users should be able to get help without having to leave the app in the first place. And then you need to define what to document and where to document it. You should be creating just a minimum amount of documentation that will get your users going, and then finding where's the best place to share that information with my users. And there are so many options to choose from. You can put information on the product documentation, a knowledge base, forums, support website, even Stack Overflow. You also need to define what not to document. This kind of sounds trivial, but it's not. I see a lot of teams creating documentation that their users will never read. So probably their time could be better spent doing something else. And then, of course, you need to define how the information should be organized to ensure that your users can find what they need. After creating the vision, you need to pitch your vision to the rest of the company. You won't be able to do everything on your own, so you need to convince developers, designers, support, and product managers to follow your vision. And by pitching your vision, you'll be signaling to the rest of the company that you have a vision, and this is important because not every team has one, and two, what the vision is, and that you're not making arbitrary decisions as you go along. Then you need to, things won't magically change, so you need to start working on implementing your vision, and the problem is that you might feel you don't have any time for doing this. It might seem that every day there's something that requires your attention. Someone might be asking you to fix typos, update screenshots, or do a bunch of other things that take a lot of your time but have few impact to your users. So I think you need to schedule time to do strategic work because it won't go away for itself. You need to spend, if you only spend your time dealing with issues like typos, screenshots, and things like that, you'll never be able to implement your vision in the first place, and you're not providing the best experience possible to your users. And finally, you need to ensure others follow your vision. It's not only enough to have a vision, communicate it to others, and then go about implementing it. You'll always be outnumbered by developers, support, essentially the rest of the company. So you need to continue reminding people what the vision is and ensuring that every decision you and everyone else makes is aligned with the vision. That means that sometimes you'll have to push back and say no to people, but that's perfectly okay. Because if you don't, and I know that all of this, driving the vision, pitching it, and ensuring others follow, it's hard. It requires you to work outside your comfort zone. But if you don't do it, you end up with a product that is hard to use. You end up with a ton of documentation, but few information to get your users going. And you end up with lots of unproductive discussions between your team and the rest of the company. Effective tech writers know the market, the product, and the users. The old mantra about knowing your audience is no longer enough today. Today, you need to understand the market, the product, and the users. Knowing the market allows you to understand what are the pain points that my company is trying to solve for my users. And knowing what the pain points are allows you to create a better product and allows you to create documentation that empowers users instead of documentation that gets in the way. Knowing the product allows you to create documentation that is aligned with your vision. So if something is trivial and you can learn something just by looking at the UI, probably don't spend your time creating docs for that. No one will read it. If something is hard to learn but can be fixed, then work with design and the development teams to fix it on the product. And of course, when something is hard to understand and can't be easily fixed on the product, then go ahead and create documentation for that. But now, the problem is, how do I know whether something is intuitive or not? And that's the reason why you need to understand your users. If you don't understand your users, you're creating something for yourself, not to others. So what happens when you don't know the market, the product, and the users? You'll have a hard time pitching your vision to the rest of the company, and probably because your vision will be centered around yourself and your teams and your needs, and not the needs of your users. It will be hard to prioritize your work because you won't be able to understand what the real pain points of your users are. And it's also possible that you end up creating documentation that is bloated and explains every tiny thing except what your customer needs to. Effective tech writers also ask why all the time. They know that everyone is telling them to do stuff, but they never explain why it's important for them. Developers might tell you that you need to document a new screen they've just added to the product. Or a product manager might tell you, oh, you need to update the release notes to something that I have. Or the support team might tell you, oh, you need to add a bunch of disclaimers to the installation docs. All of them tell you that this is really important and needs to be done now. But no one seems to explain you why. So you need to develop an habit of asking why and finding what is the problem all these people are trying to solve. So what happens when you don't ask why? You'll have a hard time prioritizing your work, and you'll see your backlog increasing, and it will seem that you can't really do anything about that. You won't be able to share your roadmap with the rest of the company because you'll be managing your work by interruptions, so it will be difficult to create a roadmap to begin with. You'll be constantly trying to fix things that seem urgent, but probably are not. And it's also possible that you end up fooling yourself. The problem might be somewhere else to begin with, and so you just went and fixed something else that has nothing to do with it. Effective tech writers also know that perfection takes time. And so even if you could create perfect documentation, whatever that means, by the time you were finished, the product would be completely different. And now your documentation is outdated and useless. And I don't believe there's any kind of silver bullet here. And you need to go about prioritizing your work and fixing the things that matter to your users. You need to be comfortable in creating just the minimum amount of documentation that can get your users going, and then shipping that. And iterating based on user feedback and not your own gut feelings or your product manager gut feelings or anyone else. If you don't apply the 80-20 rule, what ends happening is that you work a lot, but you never have a real impact on your users' lives. You'll be constantly fixing things that seem very urgent, but probably are not. And you'll always be stressed. You see your backlog increasing, and you see that you don't have a real impact because everyone keeps complaining all the time. Effective tech writers are also proactive, and they don't wait to be told what to do. If you have a vision, you need to start implementing it. But finding excuses is kind of easy. You might tell yourself, oh, my manager won't let me do that, or everyone ignores me, or my competition has more resources, so they can do a lot more than I can, or I'm only called on the last minute, so I can't fix this project any longer. Or you might tell yourself, I'm a tech writer. That's not my job description. I should not be doing that. And I know that some of you might be thinking, these are not excuses. That's the reality in my company. I can't do anything to fix that. But I don't believe that to be true. I remember a while ago that designers also complained a lot that managers won't let them implement their own ideas, that everyone ignored them, and that their competition had more resources, and they were only being called on the last minute. You see the parallel here, right? The only thing you've never heard from a designer is, that's not my job description. Instead of complaining all the time, designers were proactive, and they learned new skills, and they've adapted. And I mean, look where they are now. Management definitely listens to them. There are even companies where the VP of design reports directly to the CEO. Everyone values their opinion, and there's definitely more design budget than ever before, and designers are now included on the project since day one. So I think that the lesson here is that if you are proactive and don't wait to be told what to do, you can help revolutionize your own companies and probably the tech writing industry itself. And of course, if you're not proactive, what ends up happening is that people in your company will think that you complain a lot, but you don't help fix the problems you complain. And you'll also end up with a ton of unproductive discussions that lead nowhere. Effective tech writers also treat words as they treat any other tool. And let me explain to you what I mean by this. If you're a developer, you know that the programming language is essentially a tool that allows you to build software or apps. And so as a developer, you don't really care whether you're using C, Python, or JavaScript. You only care whether you're using the best tool for a job or not. And as a developer, you also know that every tool has its own limitations. And when you stumble on a limitation, you have two options. The first one is to complement the language with something else. So you can be using C and Python at the same time. How cool is that? The other option is to change the language itself. Like, this is what has been happening with JavaScript. Just like developers, effective tech writers know that English or any other natural language is a tool. It's kind of an interesting tool because its purpose is to transfer ideas from one person to another. And even though they allow you to transfer ideas, they kind of suck at their jobs. I mean, English or any other natural language, sometimes when you try to express something, the idea gets completely distorted on its way and is frustrating. And other times, the idea is completely lost. Fortunately, we can do the same thing a developer would do if we treat words as tools. We can either complement the language with diagrams, code samples, videos, screenshots, what have you, or we can change the language itself. We can change English to make it more effective at transferring ideas from one person to another. But the problem is that we've all been tricked by our primary school teachers into thinking, you can't really change the language. But that's not true. I mean, just like C, Python, or JavaScript can be changed, you can change English to make it more effective. But please don't trust me on this one. Trust this guy. This guy didn't really mind breaking conventions and not using the style guide. And in the process of doing so, he also ended up creating a bunch of words and expressions that we use today. If you're only obsessed with style guides and writing best practices and all of that, it's possible that you're doing art, not technical documentation. And it kind of is a problem just because your users are relying on you to get some help and you're distracting them along the way. So you're not empowering them. And you'll also be constantly working on tactical projects like rearranging sentences or fixing typos when your users need you somewhere else fixing bigger problems. Effective tech writers also share their knowledge with others. They know that everyone in their companies are doing the best they can with the resources they have. So instead of complaining about the writing skills that everyone in the company has, they coach everyone and they empower them to create documentation. Instead of asking developers to create a ticket for a problem they found, they can ask the developer to fix it themselves and be side by side with them when they are doing that. Sometimes the time it takes to file a ticket is the same time it will take to fix it. So effective tech writers end up creating a bunch of resources that can be leveraged by the rest of the company. They create presentations, style guides, blog posts, or even better, one-on-one sessions. And of course, if you're constantly complaining about that no one in your company knows how to write like you do, and you're keeping that knowledge all to yourself, guess what's going to happen? You're fighting a war against the rest of the company, so you'll lose either ways. You'll be seen as the bottleneck for your company, so no one will understand why are you spending your time doing the things you do. So if you want to be effective at building awesome apps, you need to be the CEO of the DAX, know the market, the product, and the users. You should be asking why and applying the 80-20 rule. You should be proactive. You should treat words as tools, and you should be coaching others. Thank you.